start live streaming, so please keep quiet. Don't discuss any private matters. Cool, we are online. Okay, I'll open to the public, okay? Bye. Have a nice side event. Bye.
Good side event for all.
We still have like 3 minutes, okay? 3-4 minutes, okay, Maria?
José Muelbert
Yes.
can't join. Please send
Sorry?
him a link again. José Muelbert is not able to join and needs a link again.
Okay, I'll send it now.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon.
Oh. Good morning, Jose. How are you?
Fine, thank you, Enrique. Nice to see you.
Great to see you.
Please, whoever got my email, just disregard it. I had the wrong link this morning for some reason. There are so many meetings this week that I got lost here. So should be fine now.
All right. Good afternoon from Lagos, Nigeria. Good morning, good evening, depending from where you are joining the program from. I welcome you all to the All Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance Forum, the Marine Biodiversity Observation Network side event. I am the moderator for this event, and my name is Olanike Maria Buraimoh. I teach at the University of Nigeria. I am an environmental microbiologist and my research interest is on environmental remediation and bioconversion of waste to value-added products. Now, the All-Atlantic Ocean Research Alliance intends to push the vision for a healthy and resilient Atlantic Ocean through collaboration in marine research and innovation, so as to promote the well-being of present and future generations. The MBON is to support the understanding of how and why life in the ocean is changing, and how to help define options for policies relevant to the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity. And this event will discuss and promote the contribution of MBON to the All-Atlantic Alliance vision. We are going to have a pleasant 90 minutes, and I welcome you. First, the introduction and goals will be taken by Enrique Montes, and who is the PI of MBON. And then we have our main discussion on the reflection on the status of marine species and living habitats, what information is needed to enable sustainable development, conservation, and restoration of marine ecosystem and biodiversity. So before we go ahead, I will quickly do a brief introduction of all our speakers, including the panelists. Enrique Montes will be giving us the introduction and goals. Like I said, he is an assistant scientist at the University of Miami Cooperative Institute for Marine and Atmospheric Studies. He studies physical and biological control of carbon, nitrogen, and oxygen cycling in the ocean. He is the principal investigator of the MBON Pole to Pole of the America. Like I said, the link for detailed bios of our speakers will be in the chat box in the link, and then you can read about them in detail. So I'll quickly introduce our panelists. Patrizio Mariani is a senior researcher at the Technical University of Denmark and leader of the research area in ocean observation technology. He focuses on the development of ocean technology, supporting the next generation of integrated marine ecosystem assessments. He's in marine science and engineering from the University of Naples, and is the president and coordinator of Euromarine. José Muelbert is currently a full professor at the Instituto de Oceanografía at the Federal University of Rio Grande. His experience in oceanography emphasizes the interaction between marine organisms and environmental parameters in coastal and oceanic South Atlantic and climate change. He is a member of the Brazilian GOOS, is the chair of the Brazilian National Institute for Science and Technology Center of Integrated Oceanography. He's also a member of the pool of experts for the United Nations World Ocean Assessment. And we have Yasmina Esmaeili, who is an early career scientist, PhD candidate in ecology at the University of Campinas, and a research fellow with the Marine Geo Program at the Smithsonian Environmental Research Center. She's an active member of the MBON Pole to Pole of the Americas and chair of the Communication Task Group of the International Association of Biological Oceanography. We have a wealth of panelists here this afternoon. So please, you'll find the detail for their biography in the chat box, and feel free to post your questions in the chat box. You are free to direct your question to a specific speaker, or you want to refer your question to just nobody, whereby any member of the panelists can handle the question. Thank you very much. If you have any concern, please put in the chat box. So we want to go ahead straight to the introduction and goals, and we welcome Enrique Montes to speak on the introduction. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everybody. I trust you can hear me, and if not, please let me know. Thank you, Maria, for the introduction and everybody for attending this webinar. I will be talking to you about how we have organized around the idea of implementing a marine biodiversity observation network pole to pole of the Americas. This is a very large program that some panelists here are direct contributors and members of the network, but it's a large group of people that are participating across the Americas, basically to respond to some of the needs and priorities that are being highlighted in the statement that we're presenting today, namely having a network that provides knowledge about marine life to enable the conservation, management, and sustainable use of Atlantic Ocean ecosystems. The network also seeks to incorporate or facilitate the incorporation of biology and ecosystem essential ocean variable observations into surveys and monitoring programs so that essential biodiversity variables can be computed at the regional scale, things like converging on best practices for the collection, management, and sharing of marine data, and many of the other elements that we will be discussing today that are highlighted in the statement. The MBON Pole to Pole of the Americas is ultimately people working together to observe and monitor marine biodiversity, to understand how and why it changes over time, but with the ultimate goal of benefiting society. And we come about this by using standardized methodologies and data workflows, by sharing data and knowledge between groups and individuals in the region, through technology sharing and transfer, and most importantly, through building capacity. These are I would say, our core activities as part of a network effort. The general philosophy is to gather biological and biodiversity observations using common standards and best practices, align the data that we collect to the Darwin Core Standard, and make data publicly available through the Ocean Biodiversity Information System so that these observations can then be used to compute essential ocean variables for biology and ecosystems that are sitting under the Global Ocean Service System or managed by this organization, and ultimately in support of international frameworks like Marine Life 2030 of the UN Decade of Ocean Sciences for Sustainable Development. But to get there, there are several steps that we need to fulfill before implementing this whole framework, which include the production of field protocols that are standardized and also made available through platforms like the Ocean Best Practice System, so that anyone, anywhere around the world can actually access these protocols and implement them in their study sites or regions so that they can follow through. And then it's a matter of coupling these observations or these data to data workflows that enable the publishing of taxonomic observation in OBIS. Once here, then people can use data visualization and analysis tools that the network has developed, or other tools that, for example, the Ocean Biodiversity Information System have made available to the community to generate maps or time series plots showing biological records in surveyed sites, while ensuring at the same time proper data curation and most importantly, permanent data archival. The network is implementing a suite of tools to facilitate marine biodiversity, and one of them that we're testing is artificial intelligence applications for automated extraction of taxonomic records from photoquadrant imagery to track shifts in, for example, the percent life cover of functional groups and key species in areas where we're seeing very drastic changes. These tools can aid in for example, in expanding the spatial extent and frequency of biodiversity surveys, and thus help us in capturing, for example, major die-off events like the one that I'm showing you here in this slide, where the percent cover of mussel beds in several sites in Gulf of Nuevo and Patagonia dropped from around 90% to 0 within months. These type of events have major implications for these habitats and the coastal ecosystems that may very likely impact the resources that we extract from the ocean, living resources. And so it's very important to develop tools that can capture these events as quickly as possible to respond to management. We have tested this approach with very encouraging results, showing that life cover estimates from this particular application that we're using, in this case is CoralNet, matches visual inspections on the field pretty well. Eventually, these visual records or records that are extracted with these artificial intelligence applications can be used to produce biodiversity indicators, such as things like number of species that you find in a particular habitat, or the number of mussel species, or the algae cover in an area, or the abundance of specific indicator vertebrates that may provide some information about how these systems are changing over time. And then in a particular monitor area, you can use these type of tools to communicate information to managers and policymakers using very simple visualizations that we summarize in flexible and dynamic data dashboards like the one you're seeing on this slide. An important part of this effort has consisted of providing satellite remote sensing products and analysis tools to enable the assessment of biodiversity patterns over time and space. The network is employing a global and dynamic classification of ocean biomes developed by my colleague Maria Kavanaugh at Oregon State University that we call satellite seascapes. This classification is constructed using a machine learning algorithm that clusters multiple types of satellite data that several sensors that are orbiting Earth collect into something like 33 categories that have very distinct biogeochemical properties. And so with this in mind, we anticipate that each of these seascapes that are highlighted with different colors on this animation are occupied by different species and have very specific biodiversity traits. Now, seascapes are being used by network members to understand shifts in biodiversity of, for example, reef larvae. And in this study, our colleagues from the Universidad Federal de Espíritu Santo, Ana Carolina Matsuko, and Angelo Bernardino, coupled 16 years of repeated larval recruitment data from the eastern Brazilian coast with the extent of dominant seascape categories in this region. And they found that the abundance of, for example, snail larvae and larvae of other invertebrate species in the coastal zone are strongly associated with the fractional extent of two types of seascapes, in this case, tropical seas, or the class number 15, or hypersaline eutrophic seascapes. So with this study, they are demonstrating that if you track changes in the biogeography of an area using the seascape classification, you may get a sense of how these biological communities are changing over time as well. The network has made a big effort in making both in situ biological observations and remote sensing data and other physical properties that are collected in situ available to members and anyone that is interested in these applications. And we have a website that people can consult what's going on in each of these monitoring sites by clicking on these symbols. And once there, you get information about each of these sites, the type of data that they're collecting, but also how these data, what the context of the environment is based with regards to, for example, changes in sea surface temperature or the concentration of phytoplankton biomass in the water as chlorophyll A, but also in some places we have in situ loggers that are measuring temperature changes of the coastal zone at a very high temporal resolution. In this website, people can also see biological records that have been pushed to OBIS or published in OBIS as a time series record, but also show the distribution of these observations spatially on these maps. The website also offers users access to the tools that the network has put together and developed for example, transforming an original data table into the Darwin Core files that can then be published in OBIS seamlessly. And I'm going to close the presentation today by highlighting the work that our colleagues in CBO, in the University of Porto in Portugal, Fernando Lima and Rui Seabra are doing as part of this, with this vision of integrating marine biodiversity observations in the coastal zone at the Atlantic scale. Their program is called the CCT-BON, the Atlantic Ocean Coupled Coastal Temperature and Biodiversity Observation Network, which I think it's a role model for our vision of how to implement the elements of the statement that we're presenting today. Some of the recommendations that we can come up with are, as a result of these conversations, is to foster transatlantic and translatitudinal collaborations that enable our networks to respond to management and policy needs, make a strong investment in capacity development, especially in the South Atlantic, where it's highly needed in some countries, and all of this with a very clear notion that we need to ensure that national and regional governments provide financial support to these network collaborations so that we can actually fulfill our vision of integrating biological and ecosystem observations in a standardized way over the entire Atlantic Ocean basin. And with this, I'm going to stop and thank you for your attention. Maria, I think
thank you very much, Enrique, for your presentation. That was a very good one. Please send your question to the platform, or you raise your hand during the dialogue session. So with that, we'll move to the next speaker, please. So we are going to call on our panels, and we'll start with, we're going to start with Patrizio to give his own topic and then speak. Thank you, Patrizio.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone. I hope you can see my slides fine, if not just screen. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, the organizer, to invite me for this interesting side event and to give me the opportunity to explain a little bit how Mission Atlantic is dealing with the need of additional information for the biological component, and how all this information can actually be integrated to support both the conservation, the management, and the sustainable use of the Atlantic ecosystems. So Mission Atlantic is one of these European projects funded under the All Atlantic Research Alliance. Is a European funded project, and it is clearly in support of the Belém and the Galway political initiatives, which I think are central and very important to advance our knowledge on these quite complicated issues in terms of marine management in the Atlantic Ocean. So the focus of Mission Atlantic is on integrated ecosystem assessment, and we all know that we are living in a very critical decade, at least for marine research, where we have been asked to provide solutions and solutions for global challenges. They have to be global solutions. We also are very much aware that if we destroy nature, we destroy our future. And this translates directly into understanding how we can ensure ocean health under the presence of multiple pressures. To me, all this translates into understanding two elements: complexity and uncertainty. This is because many of these pressures, they interact with each other. They don't act in isolations, of course, and they are pushing the ecosystem state into different type of equilibrium or different type of solutions. And this transition is not going to be smooth. Most likely will be a sudden shift. And there are publications out there where they show that actually these so-called tipping points, they actually are interlinked with each other. And how the dynamics between them works is something, it's an open research question. So we have been asked to provide solutions in this context, and we have been asked to reduce uncertainties to support sustainability. And we are also very much aware that we cannot do that in isolation. There is not a single researcher, a single institution, or a single nation that can do that together. So cooperation and research alliances like the one we have here in the Atlantic Ocean, they are central to advance on these issues. In terms of Mission Atlantic, what we do, we try to follow a so-called holistic or systemic approach to integrate all the best knowledge we have on these pressures or the human activities that are generating these pressures, the ecosystem components that are impacted, and what are the results in terms of their dynamics and in terms of the whole ecosystem state and the services that are provided. So the integrated ecosystem assessment is a way to frame these different steps of the approach into kind of logical phases, I would say. The first one is to understand the socio-ecological network. So try to understand the linkages between human activities, impacts, and ecosystem components. After that, understand what are the indicators that best describe the dynamic of the different ecosystem components and the ecosystem state in general. And then try to understand what are the risks and vulnerabilities associated with these pressures, both in the present state and also for future scenarios. And the project does that, trying to employ all the available information on those sources, the pressures they impose, and the ecosystem components that are affected. So in very quickly, I think we can distinguish the phase of Mission Atlantic in 4 steps. The first one is the scoping phase, where we build these conceptual models, we build these socio-ecological networks, we try to identify all the linkages. We then try to identify the indicators that best describe the dynamic of those linkages. We then perform risk and vulnerability analysis on the full network, but also on the specific ecosystem components. And then we have a phase where we have scenarios. We actually will have modeling scenarios for different climate scenarios, but we will also have tools that we will develop for doing management strategy evaluation within those scenarios and within the present state. That's basically what Mission Atlantic is doing. And Mission Atlantic is not doing that in isolation, but actually with a strong engagement with different types of stakeholders during the different phases of the project. Of course, all this relies on understanding, knowledge, and also data. And we have quite a variability between the case studies that are showed here. These are the case studies we use in Mission Atlantic. And we have quite a variability of the data availability and the quality of the data we have for different components of the ecosystem across in the Atlantic Oceans. The plan of Mission Atlantic is to align as much as possible these case studies, what we call to advance their operational readiness level, providing support to obtain more data and also more models, and also maybe establish this stakeholder fora in order to engage and discuss the results of the project. We have been through the first 18 months of the project. The project will last for 5 years, so it's ending in 2025. We have been through the scoping phase for all the case studies. So we have been identifying, we have identified the sectors acting across the different case studies, the pressures and the ecosystem components. The plan is also to find out commonalities and differences across case studies. But we also found, things that we didn't expect. Of course, fisheries, aquaculture, transport, they are all, we knew that they were there in terms of sectors generating pressures. But we were less aware of military activities can generate quite a lot of pressures in some cases, or maybe water treatment or desalination, I think was also one in some specific case studies that was quite important in affecting few specific ecosystem components. So if we plot them together, if we just do, okay, we know the human activities, we know the pressure they generate, we know what type of ecosystem components are affected, and we try to map them out, we obtain this, which a colleague of mine called it the horrendogram. On this horrendogram, of course, the exercise now is to understand what are the links that are most important and where we have the data. And I can anticipate that we have data, relatively good quality data on kind of linkages affecting the biotic component or the abiotic component, the physical part of the ecosystem, but much less so for the biological part. And that's where we need to actually invest time and money to actually collect better quality data. In Mission Atlantic, we try to do some seagoing activities to collect such data. There are more kind of demonstrations that solving specific problems that we have in a few of the case studies. We rely a lot on acoustic type of data collections. We have actually, we will demonstrate later this year the use of autonomous gliders, like the wave glider I show here in the map on the slide, and how the wave glider can be used actually to perform long distance transect with an acoustic device and to scan the ocean at different frequencies to collect information for both the fish community and the plankton community across different scales. But a big component of Mission Atlantic is also about numerical models. We have actually global ocean models coupled, fully coupled with quite complicated ecosystem models, which will generate quite a lot of data for the past and the future across the globe, and so also covering the case studies where we will have less observations in situ. A few examples here of also how we try to validate these models. And again, for example, we make use of satellite observations on different components like temperature, salinity, the sea surface height. And we try to use Argo floats to develop machine learning tools to reconstruct temperature and salinity across the whole Atlantic in 3D. And it is actually a system that could be potentially also used for the biological components. But of course, we have the Argo program up there, which is a fantastic program, was basically a revolution in oceanography, but we don't have a similar things for observing the biological part. Of course, the biogeochemical Argos are under development. There are not that many. They also have their challenges. I argued that maybe also acoustics as a sensing mechanism for biology should be considered for these large-scale programs. What we do, we reconstruct. We also try to analyze extreme events and how these extreme events are affecting specific case studies and specific ecosystem components. And we put them together to understand the importance of these elements into these linkages network. We also have activities in terms of connectivities. So these case studies, they are not taken in isolations, but actually they are taken in the context of the biogeography and in the context of actually the different dynamics affecting the Atlantic Ocean. So we have analysis of connectivity, both in terms of fish populations, but also in terms of biogeographic regions and how these biogeographic regions are changing over time. So we have several activities on that too. The core at the end of the integrated ecosystem assessment is to perform this vulnerability and risk and vulnerability analysis, where we have ongoing activities in developing machine learning tools to extract from the data and from the knowledge that we have indicators of ecosystem state in automatic and try to understand how this will perform in the future under different scenarios. We have already some examples out there. This actually is a mapping of the indicators we have and how they map respect to the marine strategy framework. This is a work ongoing and has been performed in the Azores by our case study leaders there. I want to conclude with the importance again of the alliance in performing this type of research. I think for Mission Atlantic it was very important to have different groups from South Africa, from Brazil, from Europe, of course, but also engaging with a wider community in the Atlantic Ocean to both identify the pressures, the issues, and also identify the relevant questions that we need to address. And in the context of the meeting here and the MBON, I think it's a very important activity. Now I'm talking more like the president of an organization, which is Euromarine, which is a European Marine Research Network. We have just launched a few days ago the initiative coming actually as a proposal from one of our members to launch a European Marine Biodiversity Observation Network. That's basically a European MBON, if you want. That's a proposal that emerged from our community and has been now proposed to the entire community, which is composed by 60 members organization to sign up an agreement in a way what Enrique mentioned before, to standardize the way we collect the data on biodiversity, we store the data on biodiversity, and we suggest also maybe the way we use the data on biodiversity to provide advice and support to the management. That's all for now, and thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrizio, for your impacting presentation on the integrated ecosystem assessment. We'll move on to the next presentation by José Muelbert on long-term monitoring and ocean observation. Thank you, José.
Thank you, Maria. I hope that you can hear me well, and soon you can watch my presentation. Now, I hope you have now my presentation and that you can hear me well. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of our land, pay respect to the elders, both past and present, and extend my respects to other indigenous people in the audience. Today, I will talk to you a little bit about the importance of long-term studies for conservation, restoration of marine ecosystems, and also try to link that to sustainable development. Just to show you, I'm coming right now to you from the south, from the southern part of Brazil, very close to the border with Uruguay. I'm standing here in Rio Grande. And the reason why I'm showing you this is that I'll be giving you some examples of the studies we've been taking on the estuary of this long, large coastal lagoon. For you to have an idea, this is about 250 kilometers. And all this water has to leave to the oceans through this very narrow channel, which is about only 700 meters wide and very shallow, 20 meters depth, more or less. So this creates a very, very dynamic and interesting environment in this region where we have been conducting long-term studies. Well, why do we need long-term studies? Most of you probably seen this picture, this graph. Probably some of you in the audience, were responsible for drafting it. And basically, it shows the variability of biological and oceanographic processes at different spatial and temporal scales. Yasmina, following my talk, will address the spatial scales, and I will, at this moment, concentrate on the temporal scales. You can see that you have things that happen very fast in the scale of minutes and seconds, but you have things that happen in a much, much longer time scales, 10 years, 100 years, 1,000 years. So if we want to understand these processes, we need to have long-term ecological research, long-term ecological studies. Because if you take a look and you only study it for a year, this is a very nice plot from Magnuson in the 90s. You can draw some conclusions. Well, maybe you see a seasonal cycle, maybe you see something that happens, within different months. But so what does that mean? If you analyze that for 10 years, maybe you get unusual years, very low or very high years, but still don't know exactly what's driving the system. Now, if you get starting to have longer time series, you can start relate that to other climate variability scenarios, which will impact your ecosystem. For example, you can have a relation with El Nino, with Atlantic oscillation decadal variability. And if you go even further and you start having 100 years of data, then you can start seeing that all this oscillation may have a trend. It could be a decreasing trend or it could be an increasing trend, which reflects changes in the very, very long timescales, which can lead to changes in evolution, for example. So you really need to have long-term series, time series to understand the ecosystem. And biodiversity is a key issue in biodiversity. So this is why we need long-term studies. And it's interesting that if we go in the literature, there's not too many sites that have been collected information on long-term on biology in the oceans at the moment. So most started in the 60s. So it's a time for us to enforce that for other regions in the ocean, particularly in the global south. So I will provide you a few examples of what we've learned by doing long-term studies in our region, in that estuary I showed you, and try to link them to some aspects related to sustainable development and maybe to socioeconomic processes. So here's an example of a bioinvasion of the golden mussel, the Limnoperma fortunates. It's a huge problem now in South America. And this mussel was imported from China some time ago. And we see that in the estuary, when we have periods of low salinity, which are coupled to El Nino variability, we have the presence of this mussel in the region. And as soon as salinity goes back to normal, in a period where you don't have El Nino or you may have La Nina, there's a high mortality and this mussel gets removed from the area. So, and mussel has a strong influence on biodiversity because it competes with other mussels in the region. So if you want to think in terms of restoration, if you want to think in terms of conservation, then you want to consider that. And this is an example of changes at the population level, at the species, changes within one species. Another example of population level, which has strong implications to fisheries, is the effect of long-term changes in recruitment of shrimp to the estuary, which does have a direct influence on the catch of this very important fishery research for the region, the shrimp, the Peneus paulensis shrimp. So you can see that years where you have La Nina, which implies in a very strong entrance of salinity in the estuary, you can have very good catches of shrimp. In contrast with years of El Nino, where you have very low catches. This is very, very important for fisheries management. In fact, this strategy is already being used here in the region. So years where you have El Nino, you can modulate the time scale of your fishing season because you know that there will be more availability of shrimp. In years where you have El Nino, you may have to concentrate and reduce the seasoning of fishing. And this is very important in terms of socioeconomics for the region, because there are many fishers that do depend on this shrimp catch. Variability can also, at longer time scales, impact communities. And in this case, I bring you an example of zooplankton and ectoplankton assemblages. So in this Hofmahler plot, you basically have from the coastal area to the more internal region of the lagoon, changes in salinity expressed here as anomalies of salinity from 2000 to 2008. So just, 8 years, but you can see that years where you have, we know that from the literature, strong El Nino, you have freshwater dominating the estuary, and you have a completely change in the species composition there, having it mostly driven by freshwater cladostra and copepods, and even having larvae of freshwater fish. While when we have a more regular scenario, you have the presence of more saline marine species like Acarchathonsa and fish larvae like the Trichiurus and Parona, which are very important to the region. So this has implications. Zooplankton is the basis of the food web. So this has implications through the whole ecosystem in the region and may change biodiversity. Another very interesting variability imposed at these longer time scales that we found in this region is the changes in the habitat, at the habitat level, actually at the ecosystem, which is in this case expressed by the seagrass, by the submerged aquatic vegetation. In years where you have a regular or more saline environment, you have the presence of seagrass beds in this shallow embayments in the estuary. And you can see that the water is quite transparent, and the seagrass beds are very important to act as a nursery area for shrimp and fish that are important in terms of of fishing in the region. But in years where you have dominance of fresh water, you have the appearance of opportunistic green algae. These green algae bloom very fast. They die very fast. So they turn the water very anoxic. There's a lot of consumption of oxygen, and the situation is quite different. So you lose this habitat, which is very important in terms of nursery and in terms of maintaining biodiversity, to a habitat where biodiversity is lessened. So this, you can only learn that looking at long-term series, but we cannot measure everything. You know, it was said earlier on by Patrizio, and also Enrique brought in this concept of using essential ocean variables or essential biodiversity variables. Those are the few variables that literature shows that you need to measure them through time. And having them through time will allow you to understand better how the ecosystem and how biodiversity changes through time, and the influence this will have on the economic and social implications for the people and for the regions. And this is very important. So I think MBON has a very strong component here, bringing this notion that you need to observe biodiversity through time using essential ocean variables or essential biodiversity variables. And just to bring you an example, in terms of numbers here, you know, we could do this analysis. There is this analysis done for different industries, but here looking at tourism, how much does tourism is important to our oceans, and how much this is linked to biodiversity? So, you know, the monetary values here are a little bit outdated, and they're expressed in reais. I'm sorry, I didn't have time to change that. So you can roughly divide these numbers by 5 to have an idea of US dollars. But we are working here in the case of, you know, $70 billion a year. But mostly what I'd like to get your attention is to the jobs that are created in the tourism industry. And the tourism industry is very, very well tied up to biodiversity. You go to a coral reef, you go to an area where you have a coral reef because of the high biodiversity. You go diving, you want to see clear waters where you can see, for example, the seagrass beds that I showed you. You can see the fish associated to it. You can have, you know, the big industry of whale watching is related to biodiversity. So when we change biodiversity, we're not only changing directly the ecosystem, but we're also changing the economics of a region. And we could feel that with the pandemics in the last 2 years, the implication that had for a socioeconomic. So in summary, I would like to say that variability in the ocean processes occurs several time scales, and we need long-term studies for conservation and restoration of the marine ecosystems. And this can be done using essential ocean variables so that we can have strong monitoring programs to allow sustainable development using integrated ecosystem management, as Patrizio showed, in terms of long-term observations. Muito obrigado, thank you very much, and I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Muelbert, for a very impactful presentation. We move on to the last presenter, Yasmina Esmaeili from the University of Campinas. She's going to speak to us this afternoon. So can you please get ready to speak, Yasmina? Thank you very much. Yasmina, you are speaking on ocean restoration. Thank you.
Yasmina, we can't hear you.
Can you unmute, Yasmina?
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, but
Okay,
please,
sorry.
can you increase the volume?
I will try to speak a bit louder. Is that all
Very
right?
good. Yes.
Okay. I'm also sharing my screen. It's visible, right?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Maria. So as Professor Muelbert clearly illustrated, there is a need for having these marine biodiversity observations on a large temporal scale. But today I will also talk a bit about the large spatial scale that is.
Okay, so Yasmina, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Your volume is not stable. So we are not hearing you properly.
Okay, let me try again.
I think you need to keep your microphone really close to your mouth, because sometimes you have it a little more distant and sometimes closer. When you are really close, that's okay.
Is it better this way?
Mm.
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so I took out my headphones. Maybe that will be better. I'm sorry. All right. So I will start again, maybe just to make sure. As I was saying, so Professor Muelbert clearly illustrated that we have this need for long-term data sets to be able to observe patterns and fluctuations in the marine biodiversity over time. And in addition to that, I would like to highlight and talk a bit more about the importance of scale. So as we said before, clearly linked to the connectivity in the Atlantic Ocean Basin, initiatives such as the Atlantos have already highlighted the importance of incorporating biology, ecology, as well as biogeochemistry of the ocean and the seafloor in the ocean observations. Because similar to other ocean variables, such as sea surface temperature and salinity, the patterns in biodiversity are not only predicted to change, or not only vulnerable to change over time, but also in space. However, as this study shows in this map, so the yellow highlights on this map being the areas with the most records. So this study shows actually the publicly available data that we have from platforms such as GBIF and OBIS. And we can see that these are still largely geographically biased. So most data obviously is concentrated in the Northern Hemisphere, with the exception of Australia. While we're just looking at how these water masses are connected in the Atlantic Ocean. And we can also see on this map the major shipping routes. So the lines connecting the continents along the Atlantic, illustrating also the economic connectivity that the Atlantic Ocean sustains. However, as expected, this map that has projected the areas that should be prioritized for conservation show that a large portion of these areas of interest for conservation are present in the Southern Hemisphere, which means that there is a clear gap that needs to be addressed. And when we talk about restoration efforts, so similar to the restriction of the geographical data, the restoration efforts are also highlighted here in dark blue by the number of articles that are available about ocean restoration efforts in this study by Franchetti et al. Last year. And they emphasized also that the context, so the degree of human impact, the ecosystem type, as well as the habitat of where this restoration activity is undertaken is often of greater relevance to the successful outcome than how. So the where is more important than the how. And so the success of restoration is strongly linked to where it occurs. However, to be able to conduct restoration efforts, there is a need to have a clear understanding of how the biodiversity changes over time and on a large spatial scale for them to be successful. So to actively restore aquatic ecosystems, they should be chosen wisely. And then in addition to that, naturally, but often overlooked, it is impossible to discuss biodiversity without mentioning its benefits for society. So This was already addressed in the previous talks a few times. And that's also why it's identified as an ecosystem service with the several benefits it provides for socioeconomic systems and the crucial role it plays in so-called the blue economy. This connection emphasizes the need to incorporate these interactions between biodiversity and society, and bringing in the picture by looking not only at the benefits it provides to society, but also the effects that society has on the biodiversity. And the best way of accomplishing that would be by broadening the participation and mainstream applications also of this biodiversity information. So that's why I wanted to talk a bit about the co-design process. So the participative process that can be implemented in the form of co-design, where instead of plans being designed by a group of scientists that is represented to different stakeholders, for the stakeholders of interest to be involved from the start in the thinking process. So as Patrizio mentioned before, really having this integrated construction of conservation or restoration plans. And this can be done, for example, obviously this is also important to mention that the stakeholders in all of these areas will often be different, and the reality of the people involved will be very different from one area to the other. So by having, for example, participative workshops, it offers the stakeholders to receive inputs from different angles, and these efforts in multidisciplinary teams could truly generate outputs that will have a purpose on a regional scale, but that can also be expanded on a larger scale for the whole Atlantic. And then lastly, I would like to talk a bit as an early career scientist of the process of how early career scientists are formed and also how they are involved in this process. So we often talk about collaboration and the importance of collaboration. However, from the start, our formation is often very focused on individual success. So I believe as an early career scientist that collaboration should be something that is encouraged from the start of professional careers. So instead of having projects that are highly focused on, limited to your research during your program, if they are, all these individual projects can be constructed in an interdisciplinary way, then it's something that is already part of the formation of future scientists, which will make it easier along the way to have these collaborative networks. And I think this is an essential point to be touched on as well. So this was the end of my presentation. I will pass on the word again to Maria. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Yasmina. Thank you for your presentation. At this juncture, I want to thank all the panelists. And now we enter into the discussion session, the dialogue session. So I can see there's a question in the Q&A box. So I will just read it out and then we'll wait for other questions. Please, if you have any question, you can either raise your hand or you put it in the Q&A box. You can make contribution to what has been said. If you have better idea you want to offer, it is welcome at this time. So let me read the question. This question is from José Muelbert. It says, hello everyone, inspiring and interesting presentations. This is a general question or provocation. I assume the evidence of the importance of long-time sustainable integrated observation is compelling and extremely useful for policymakers. Furthermore, it's clear that collaborations, networks, and common standards, fair care, OBIS, EBVs, OBIS are key for success. So what are we doing wrong that prevents this message from reach our managers, policymakers, and the general public? So the question is not directed at a specific member of the panelists. So Anybody can answer that question. Patrizio, you want to start the discussion?
Yeah, well, I don't really have an answer. The thing, I'm not entirely sure that we are not reaching out to the political level or to the decision maker level. It's just that some of these long-term and detailed observations, they are costly to make and costly to maintain. Often, there are examples where these have been tried. I mean, where it's sort of a long-term observation, they started within the context maybe of a research project, but at the end of the research project, the long-term stations is gone. And that has produced a lot of fragmentation both in terms of the time period that is covered, but also fragmentation in terms of methods. So I don't know if it's only a problem for the managers and the political side, but maybe it's also a problem on the scientific community to agree on some of common methods. Of course, I mean, funding is essential to maintain some of these activities, but also having common standard and common sensors and the procedures for calibration for extraction of the data agreed across a large community like the one of MBON, or a large community like the one of the All Atlantic Research Alliance. That could advance. And then, of course, maybe acting with a single voice and knocking on the door of those that are keeping these funds for research and for marine research, and to dedicate constantly and with long-term funding for the sustainability of these observations. I think that could be the strategy, but it's not an easy one.
Okay, thank you for your contribution, Patrizio. Any other discussion? Maybe I should further provoke the panelists, because over here in Nigeria, we have issues. And truth be said, if the EU are trying their very best to preserve the ocean, and the developing nations like Nigeria that have shared ocean borders with the EU and other parts of the world is not properly taken care of in terms of pollution, then the problem will persist. Because whatever happened in this part of the world through the ocean is passed down to every other part of the world. We have exchanges, ships and all that. So, but one, I'm going to talk about two things. One, our governments, they don't so much, in quote, care about whatever research outcomes we have. So currently we are trying to develop a kind of synergy between researchers and lawmakers or policymakers, so that before we start our research, the policymakers will tell us, what is it you want? What solution do you want? And then that is the area of research. And then the researchers have been informed that their publications are jargons, that the politicians insist that they don't understand the scientific jargon in our papers, so there is no way they can use it to make policy. So this is the stage we are in Nigeria. And I can tell you that we still have problems. For example, if I know that the issue of plastics are very much talked about, we already established from all this discussion that anthropogenic activity is a major problem of the ocean that impacts the ocean and the living things in the ocean. Much has been said about plastics, and a lot of work is already ongoing all over the world regarding plastics. So plastic is already reducing in the ocean, but I don't know if that reduction of impact of plastic has been measured by scientists. But we also have some other wastes, like the biomass waste, the treatment, industry waste that still goes into the lagoon and then into the ocean via the different lagoons and rivers. Nobody is really talking about that around here. So that's my own thought also. All right, now let me give room to Isabella Sosa. She's raising her hand. So I would like Isabella to unmute and please ask your question or make your contribution. Thank you.
Okay, I was waiting. I think José is a panelist. I mean, this question was asked to him too, but I'll just give my very short contribution. I think to Monica's question, I think as Patrizio said, I don't think we are completely ineffective, but we are not effective enough. And the thing is that who should do the monitoring? I mean, we are assuming that this is the scientific community, but this is not the scientific community's job. And this is what has been, I mean, it was not considered. Now actually is more accepted that this is not monitoring anymore, it's long-term data, collection. And of course, that's important for science too. But for a very long time, monitoring was not considered as a research activity, although it's very often done by research. And research is not organized in long-term, the projects are short-term. So this was really not a way to fund monitoring and fund these larger data sets. So I think there is a bit, at least in Europe and hopefully in other parts of the world, also a little more awareness that this is necessary and needs to be funded somehow, if not from science, then in other programs, environmental programs, and so on. And so I hope this will continue to improve in the future, but it's true that we should really give a very clear sign here, specifically for the All Atlantic, although it's a research program. So we need to, but that somehow this long-term perspective and long-term data gathering should be a part of this program.
Thank you very much, Isabella. I think Muelbert is raising his hand. Please, can you unmute?
Yes, thank you, Maria. Yeah, Isabel just brought in a very interesting point, which reflects some of the discussions we had yesterday in the All Atlantic 2022 seminar. I was the rapporteur for the engagement cross-cutting theme. And it's interesting that one thing that came out very strongly is communication. We're definitely not communicating well. And the reason why we do that is we are always, just talking amongst ourselves. Like the issues that Patrizio just brought out, we know they are important, but they are probably very important to us, standards and things like that. They are methodological issues that are important to us, not to the public or to the government. They want to have information, not necessarily the data. And this brings to the point that Isabel was making. Well, researchers are doing monitoring because most governments cannot understand, and we don't transmit to them the importance of having to do what's called the operational oceanography. I mean, the day-to-day monitoring, the day-to-day looking at things that are happening in the ocean, which does not necessarily have a direct research question. One of the examples we have by doing our long-term studies here, we feel exactly that. Sometimes we go to granting agencies and say, well, we want to study it for 10 years because we need to monitor it. Well, you don't have a hypothesis you want to test. So we have to go back and keep on making up hypotheses to justify to the research agencies that we want to do a long-term study. So this is basically one thing that I want to emphasize, lack of communication. And this is particularly true in the Global South. I mean, in Latin America and other parts of the Global South, in less developed countries, it's very hard. There's lack of funding. There are other infrastructure problems, logistical problems, but the governments don't give the priority to environment. In the country where I live right now, we're facing these very strong problems. You all know it. Even with the Amazon forest, which is a huge, globally issue, we don't get response. So, and the ocean is not seen, it's still not perceived as so important. So we need to communicate better. And I think yesterday there are some strong messages that were sent, particularly regarding to ocean literacy, where we have to really change the way we communicate to the general public at large. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Muela. Now, before you, Yasmina, because you raised your hand to make contribution, but you have a question waiting for you on the chat box. So let's give room to Enrique Montes to speak to the question asked earlier.
No, I would just want to compliment what Jose and Patrizio just mentioned, and also Yasmina, and that is that it's not necessarily that we're not communicating with managers and policymakers effectively, which is also a problem, but these things take time. I mean, some of the ecological responses to long-term climate trends that Jose is finding in Lagoa dos Patos have taken decades to really understand. So, and the problem is that research funding comes in for very short time periods. Now, some agencies are interested in implementing longer timescale projects. And at the end of the day, it comes down to what Isabel was mentioning. This is not the goal of scientific research, it's not monitoring. At some point, that needs to be transferred to government agencies that really implement the biological observations of these areas. Just like Frank Muller-Carter would say, the way we monitor the atmosphere for meteorology, if we had to rely on research programs to understand how weather changes in our countries, we would be in serious problems. Now these government agencies have their network of atmospheric sensors that are installed across the world, and this is not necessarily being managed by scientists. These are operational infrastructures. So our vision is that biodiversity and ecological indicators that Patrizio was talking about before can be implemented at the operational level and not necessarily depend strictly on scientific research.
Okay, thank you very much, Enrique. So I move to you, Yasmina. And in addition to whatever you want to say, there is a question waiting for you here. And the question reads, how can we answer the question of Monica using co-design? It says, this question to Yasmina, how can we answer the question of Monica using co-design? Is that a way to do things better, and how?
Yes, so in addition, what I wanted to say initially was I saw a question that was posted here by Monica as well, for having these big differences and gaps along and across the Atlantic, which actually comes back to what you mentioned before, Maria, the funding. It's essential, it's clearly different for different locations. And so I think one way of going about it, which was not mentioned here before, is also thinking about how can we make it more cost efficient, and how can we make monitoring also accessible to everyone? So how can this become something that's more affordable? Because often these protocols, and I'm speaking out my own experience, these protocols are developed by nations that have funding or have access to different tools, different methods, different things that they can implement in a very easy way. And when these protocols reach countries that are in development, they are like, we can't do this because we don't have this. And so I think it needs to be something that is implemented within the protocols of making them something that is accessible and doable for everyone, even when funding is restricted. So that comes back to your question, Maria. And then in regards to the co-design process, I think the most important point is not only seeing how we can communicate to society and different stakeholders what the problems are that we are facing, but also for them to be able to communicate what the problems are and how these are closely related to biodiversity. So sometimes by listening, we could actually be passing on more information and for them to make that link by themselves. So instead of dictating to local communities or even policymakers what the issues are and how they have to deal with it, we could turn the table around and actually listen to what their problems are and make those links to biodiversity so that they can see that the things that they are dealing with are very closely related to changes that are happening. And then make it in this co-design process, make them realize how closely these two are connected. And when people have a sense of inclusiveness and also a sense of property, so knowing that the ocean is ours, we're doing this or we're taking actions because it's ours, gives a lot of empowerment, I think, specifically of the issue in general. I hope that answers the question.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to know if Jose is still raising his hand.
Yes, I just wanted to make a brief comment on the co-design and use a local example. You know, it's very important to involve the community. And in the case of the shrimp fisheries, and actually in case of the local small-scale fisheries that we have here, right now there is no government interference in managing fisheries in Brazil. So, but we managed to actually talk to the fisher community, and they have this co-op system. So we create a forum. This is called the Patos Lagoon Fora, and in this fora, you know, we managed to bring in information, and the fishers were very keen on getting this information and use this information so that they themselves can help to manage, to self-manage the fisheries. So I think co-design, you know, and taking then the different stakeholders involved, it's a big solution, not only relying just on government itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll go back to the Q&A session, and same from Monica. She said, thanks. The point I am trying to make is that we have big differences and gaps along and across Atlantic. We also need to share and adapt the success pathways. Isabel is absolutely right on the paradigm shift on monitoring versus long-term data gathering. Thank you very much for your contribution, Monica. And here I have, I think, I have Gabriela Kanioko. So Monica's very important question. How can we bring this message to the All Atlantic Ocean Research Forum ministerial meeting later this summer? Do I repeat the question to the panelists? So Monica's very important question. How can we bring this message to the All Atlantic Ocean Research Forum ministerial meeting later this summer? So panelists who would like to tackle that question or respond to that comment?
Well, maybe I can start in a naive way. Maybe we are doing it in a sense. These side events are connected to the All Atlantic Research Forum, and is supposed to be linked to the ministerial event that we will have later in July. I suppose, I mean, out of this meeting, there is already some initiative to make a common statement about what research should focus on in terms of advancing research on marine life. And I think that's what we can do from the scientist point of view. Of course, I mean, improving communication, that's always a big issue. And I think we are getting better over the years, and we are still kind of aligning expectations, both from the political side and from the scientific side as well. I think it takes time to develop a common language and to develop common ambitions and expectations. But I think we never had, as today, the ocean present in all political agendas, global, European, national. I think it's all over the place. So they are calling in for solutions, and I think the scientific community should also focus about what type of solutions we can provide with the data that we have now.
Thank you very much. Please, any other panelists want to emphasize more on this contribution and question? We want to shed more light? Yes. Any other contribution? Okay, so another question here for Patrizio. It says, can you make mention of the Galway and Belém statements and that we all participating here need to focus attention of government to integrate biology into ocean observation through co-design and partnership? So can you please shed more light?
Perfectly right. I mean, all these political initiatives, in a way, they are mirroring a need, which is the need of cooperation across the Atlantic on the research level and on the political level to address global challenges. I mentioned it at the start of my talk that, I mean, to identify global solutions to the global challenges, the only way is through cooperation and research alliances as this one, or cooperation at the level of scientific and political level. So Belém and Galway, I think they are milestones of that in terms of the Atlantic cooperation.
Okay, thank you very much. Monica commented, she said, great points at Enrique. I wonder what this would represent to the new generation. What is the legacy we will pass along? We need to fight and reestablish a path to success. So any comment on this? I want to know if I missed out any question. I think Isabel she's raising her hand. She wants to speak.
Sorry, I did not introduce myself. Isabel Sousa Pinto from the University of Porto on CMR, and also from MBON. But no, I just wanted to say regarding how can we make sure this reaches the all Atlantic, that there'll be other side events also still from the all Atlantic, like the one organized by Mission Atlantic and the one organized on Atlantos, that also will address things that are relevant here that for what we are discussing here. And I think we need to really work in a coherent messaging from all these initiatives, so this message is stronger than reaching hopefully the policymakers that will be convening in Washington later this year. We also have this opportunity then later this month, actually, in Lisbon for the Ocean Conference. Of course, this will be more global, but again, I think these activities as the basin level, they are really how you build also the global level. You know, this is also a very important scale that we should continue to raise. So this long-term, this integration and this for ocean observations, and especially on biology, we should keep bringing this at different times and really have a coherent message, so this reaches the policymakers, hopefully.
Thank you very much. I can see José Muelbert raising his hand. Can you please unmute?
Yes, I just want to emphasize that ecosystem and biodiversity are stated as one of the main priority themes in the Belém Declaration. So I agree with Patrizio. We're maybe doing this here today in this discussion. So if we come out from here with very strong recommendations and statement, this will be a voice that will be joined by other voices that are also conducting other events, as Isabel mentioned during this week, and the meeting itself that we had these previous 2 days, which one of the themes was ecosystem. And from that theme, they probably are, from what I gathered, sending out the more or less the same messages that we have here. You know, messages that, you know, promote the need for a government structure, for equitable participation, for collaboration in science and technology, and particularly to provide sustainable and flexible funding to local realities and demands, because this is something that we haven't had so far, and it's very important to move forward in having these observations taking place at different places. Thank you.
Thank you, Muelbert. Gabrielle, you can unmute.
Yes, thank you for this discussion. Sorry, and Monica, it's I see your comment in the chat. It's a good avalanche, and I'm glad that you've started a dialogue around some of the messages that we can bring, not only in the All Atlantic Ministerial, but as Isabel and others have mentioned at the UN Ocean Conference, and there are other opportunities as well. I believe that the statement from this event, from this marine life focused event for the ministerial, would be made available for comment. And I would encourage us to bring the concepts that we're talking about here, the integration of biology more routinely into monitoring and observing investments, but also new ideas for co-design and integrating with local communities to better align our observing and monitoring with the needs of those communities. There's a lot of efficiency to be gained there potentially from a funding and coordination perspective. So I would suggest that we look at that statement and think about the messages we want to put forth there, because those can also be reflected by the marine life community that's coming together at the UN Ocean Conference and elsewhere. So thank you for this discussion. I think this is important. This is exactly the kind of dialogue we wanted to encourage with the event today.
Thank you very much, Gabrielle. Unfortunately, the time is up for the dialogue. So we want to move ahead to the conclusions and next steps, which will be given by Yasmina Shah. Yasmina, you have the floor. Thank you.
Right, so together with our panelists, we have written down the final remarks, actually summarizing everything that was discussed here. And in general, we wanted to highlight the importance of marine life information for the human well-being in the Atlantic. So the main objective is to provide knowledge about marine life and the changes in face of the multiple stressors, to have this conservation and management, as well as sustainable use for the Atlantic Ocean ecosystems. And the way of doing so, as suggested, would be to develop regional essential biodiversity variables. So incorporating the biology and ecosystem essential ocean variable observations into the surveys and the monitoring programs at the local scales. Importantly, doing so by converging on what the best practices are. So standardizing the way that we are collecting, managing, and also sharing all of this marine life data, following the FAIR principles. And especially, having this with the aid of interoperability, reuse, and also data integration. It was also highlighted that there's a importance for having meaning dialogues between stakeholders and always looking for collaborations to be able to conserve and also conduct responsible use of the Atlantic Ocean, including all parts of the ocean, so the deep ocean, marginal seas, but also coastal ecosystems in the concept of the Sustainable Development Goals. And also going about this process by increasing the co-production of knowledge and capacity across the Atlantic Basin to try to make that knowledge gap smaller between the northern and the southern hemisphere, or eastern or western Atlantic. And so lessen the regional inequalities that we have to ensure that the information that is collected and the applications address the human community needs. And lastly, to increase the support for the coordination and collaboration of these regional efforts to be able to have a successful UN Decade of the Ocean Science, which we discuss so oftenly, but I think reaching the point of actually making it happen. So if there are no further questions or remarks, I don't know if there's anyone who would like to add something to our statements. This is the summary that we have made from a one-page document. And obviously, anyone who was who participated in this conversation is welcome to send in suggestions of important points that would be useful to be added to this discussion or to this final documents with the conclusions that we have here.
Thank you very much, Yasmina, for the closing remarks. So if there is no other comments, no other contribution, I think we have come to the end of today's presentation. I am sure indeed that we have all taken home one lesson or the other. Thank you so much for coming, all the attendees. Thank you for coming, the panelists. We thank you for your time. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you, Maria and panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria and panelists.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. We didn't have a chance to take a picture of everybody.
Yes, that could be a good idea. Everybody left already, or the panelists are still there?
I think we can still do that.
I'm still here.
Yeah, yeah. So, okay, Joanna,
That was great. Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it.
That was great.
Nice picture. Perfect.
Yes.
We are flying now.
Okay. So thank you all. Fantastic meeting.
Yeah, I hope we can get a way to convey the message up.
We will. Bye-bye.
I will
get a picture.
Yes, I got it.
Thank you, Maria. Thanks for moderating. Really good job.
Thank you all. Have a nice day. Have a nice weekend.
Someone for taking